Roy C. Booth hails from Bemidji, Minnesota, and is a published author, poet, and option screenwriter with nearly 1,000 publication credits. An internationally awarded playwright with 57 stage plays published, with 850-plus productions in 30 countries in 10 languages. He's also known for collaborations with Brian Keene, Eric M. Heidemann, William F. Wu, Alex Cohagen, and others, and has over 130 items on Amazon, over 200 if you count his pseudonym. Reading for Roy today is Cynthia Booth. So please welcome to the stage for Roy C. Booth, Cynthia Booth.
Yeah, that's fine. Hello.
Hello.
Just word of warning, this is a bit longer than some of the other stories, I believe, so I was glad we went last. This is from a book called Simple Things. It is a short story called Home Sweet Hell, and it is written by Roy C. Booth and Axel Cohagen. Another case of mystic mayhem and murder, Henry thought. It was a sunny afternoon when Henry Carlson entered the Simon Realty office. It was a small building that was once a residence and now surrounded by shrubbery and lots of ugly, unused space. Inside the cheery office, Mr. Darrell Simon, a balding, middle-aged man who probably hadn't done any decent exercise since college, shook his hand with a warm smile. Just that brief contact alone told Henry that Mr. Simon would always be single, would never make Realtor of the Year, and would die of a heart attack well before his 60th birthday. Would you like some coffee, Mr. Carlson? No, and just make it Carlson. No, Mr. All right. Sure, Carlson it is then. Mr. Simon motioned Henry to take a seat, and he obliged. Now, Mr. Simon, the reason why you called me here. Thank you for coming all this way, Carlson. I wouldn't have bothered calling in someone like you. You come very highly recommended, but he trailed off, ran his hand behind his neck, and then continued, the nature of this is so gruesome. I understand. The police do too. That sort of thing is usually why I get called in, not them. Mr. Simon fidgeted with the pen on his desk, unwilling to verbalize his internal anxiety. Henry gave out a low, barely audible sigh. Mr. Simon was going to be one of those clients, it seemed. You said there had been some issues connected with the house you were trying to sell. Want to give me a little bit more to go on? Issues? Issues? Oh, Lord. I don't know where to begin. Oh, here comes the floodgate, Henry thought. Janie is dead, and Deidre and Mark are in marriage counseling, for God's sakes. Mr. Alstone ended up in the emergency room, and Mrs. Alstone was put on a 72-hour hold. Bingo. Issues, Mr. Simon sputtered to a stop, wiped his forehead, and then composed himself. Issues doesn't quite seem to cover it. He held out his hands in a pleading gesture, and I could be responsible. Why don't you start from the beginning, Mr. Simon? Mr. Simon pulled out his handkerchief and blew his nose. I just listed this house. It was John Davis's mother's house, 1411 Bayberry Avenue, about 15 miles out of town in Greenwood Township. At the house? Yes. No. Yep, one of those. Right where he is now, Mr. Simon, still in town? Oh, on a family vacation at some sort of resort outside of Bemidji. Okay, go on. Well, his mother, Agatha, died 2 weeks ago, and she put it on the market with me. I wasn't close to her. She was always a bit of a recluse, so I never met her, but I've known John for years. He's our local dentist, and okay, now please tell me about this. Janie, was it? Yeah, Janie. So I called in Janie Parson like I always do. She gives the house a good cleaning. You know, just makes it look nice. I see. She's great about letting me know if anything needs repair or a coat of paint or that sort of thing. She was supposed to be there last Tuesday. I never heard anything back from her, so I assumed everything was in shipshape and order and called Deidre and Mark Peters. And okay, now who are they now? Oh, they've been renting for me for a while over at Grover's Corner, and they have another kid on the way. They're looking for a house to own, so I thought of them right off. Okay. Mr. Simon paused. Carlson, Deidre is the sweetest lady I've ever known. No, really. Polite, soft-spoken, great with kids. And Mark is as calm and rational as they come, cool as a cucumber, if you get what I mean. Henry just nodded. On their way back from seeing the house, they began screaming and hollering at each other like they were on the verge of divorce or something, ripping clothes, pulling hair, and throwing fists. He shook his head. Did it all parked right in front of the First Lutheran Church, just as the Bartles were going through the rice line at their wedding. Absolutely horrible scene. He kicked her out of the car, sped off going 60 in a 30 zone, and nearly ran over the poor widow Hodgkins and her poodle, Miss Sweetums. Ditched the car on the roadside out by Euclid Avenue, and then wandered into Bill Bentley's yard, screaming and hollering till the police got there. They calmed him down, but apparently it was bad. Were they arguing when he showed him the house? Oh, I wasn't there. You weren't? No, I haven't actually seen the house yet. Why is that? I haven't had a chance. I had Janie leave the spare front door key in that frog thing in the flower bed. Frog thing? You know, one of those things that's supposed to look like a cute little garden ornament, but really opens up to hold a spare key? Sure, okay. Well, I trust them, like I do all my other clients, so I told them just let themselves in, have a good look around, and that's what they did. From what they said at the police station, yeah. And what about this Alstone couple? Pillars of the community, great folks. He owns his own chain of grocery stores in tri-counties. Alstone Family Foods, oh, they're big shots around here. You passed one of their stores off the highway when you came into town, I bet. They have their own fried chicken recipe and baked goods, brand that they sell at their stores. Their products are and Henry sighed, getting a word in edgewise was proving to be a challenge, and he hated having to do that. What happened to them? Oh, well, what I'm saying is that they aren't people prone to, well, outrageous behavior. Very public image conscious, if you know what I mean. Henry allowed himself to blink and just nod. You see, they were looking for something for her son, Jasper, their eldest, and his family who are moving back into town from Colorado, where he was working as a forest ranger, and did he and his wife have a big blow-up or something? Simon's face went slack and he gulped hard. She stabbed him with a fork at dinner. Just reached across and skewered the back of his hand. You see, apparently they had been arguing before then. Over what? Oh, I really don't know. Okay, go on. Mr. Simons nodded solemnly. They went into the house, got the key from the frog thing, went in, came back out, put the key back, drove to Porky's Pork Chop House, ordered the number 3 special, and something happened and it got out of hand. How much out of hand? She said she was finished. He offered to take her last piece. She agreed, and then when he went to take it off her plate, she screamed and stabbed his hand with her fork, stuck him straight to the table. This is according to Sally Mather, who was their waitress, and they were all snarky when they got there, totally out of character. Anyway, Mrs. Alstone starts calling him the devil, rips off her blouse, and then jumps into the salad bar. She's still on a 72-hour hold. What about Jamie? Oh, God. You said she's dead. Mr. Simon nodded, unable to speak. Go on, Mr. Simon. I called her next day. I had another house for her to get ready. He sucked in a deep gulp of air. There was no answer. She also worked as a barista at the coffee shop on 3rd Street here in town. They told me she hadn't shown up for work that morning. I was worried, so I went to her apartment on Old Markham Hotel to check on her. She'd been so alone after her folks died, poor thing. His eyes watered and he blew long and hard into his handkerchief again. She killed herself, didn't she? How did you know? It makes sense. Fits a pattern. I've seen this sort of thing before. Oh, continue. Oh, the manager, Joey Roscoe, let us in. We found her just dangling there from the ceiling fan. Did the police have any question if it was suicide? Mr. Simon resolutely shook his head. No, there was a note. We didn't find that, though. The police did, tucked away in her cleaning kit. She said everything was just hopeless, just plain hopeless. It was pretty clear. She climbed onto the fan, strung herself up there, and kicked the ladder down. Henry nodded and clicked his tongue. I think I have an idea what's going on here. You do? I think so, yes. I'm going to need to see the house for myself, though. Sure, you can follow me in your car. It's not far from here, maybe half a mile or so. Mr. Simon parked his car in the driveway. Henry pulled up behind him and hurried out first. They walked up the path to the front door. Henry stopped a generous 10 feet from the door and looked around. His eyes focused on the steps and on the ground. The house looked as foreboding as its reputation that preceded the two men. The shrubbery was overgrown, and it was badly in need of some brightening up, paint notwithstanding. Not fond of company, was she? That's what I heard. Agatha Davis was an odd one. Grew up in the mountains of Appalachia. Didn't take too well to most in town. Appalachia? Yeah, hillbilly draw and everything, kind of backwards and all. Loved her family, though. Probably the only thing that kept her here. Henry now had his hands on his hips. Mr. Simon could clearly see the investigator's gears working. There's a back door to this place, right? Mr. Simon stood behind him, puzzled. Should be. Let's go around and get in that way. There's something I need to check out and make sure first. They walked around the house and entered through a sliding glass door that connected to the patio. Henry methodically stared at the back of the home and looked in every room until he entered a bedroom converted into a sewing room. He looked around, noting the sewing machine, knitting basket, weaving loom, and then opened the closet. Everything was orderly with balls of yarn, bolts of fabric, neatly organized by color on the shelves. On the top shelf was a row of enormous antique-looking books. Henry pulled up the chair from the sewing machine and stood on top of it. He did not remove the books. Instead, he pulled out a purple handkerchief and ran it slowly in front of the shelf in front of the books and inspected it. Mr. Simon couldn't help himself and began to sway back and forth in anticipation. Henry grimaced and nodded. Yep, I think I got it. Got what? Henry got down, carefully put away his handkerchief, and then put the sewing chair back before answering. If I'm right, you should have no problem selling this house in a few weeks. Really? Yep. And what's going on? You're pretty sure all the people that entered the house before came in the front door? Mr. Simon looked puzzled. Well, yeah, that's where the key is, and the frog thing. Uh-huh, follow me. Okay. Henry strode to the entryway and opened the front door. He motioned Mr. Simon to stay behind him, and Mr. Simon wisely complied. Say, what do you... Henry put his fingers to his lips to shush Mr. Simon and opened the front door. He looked down at the bright green and yellow embroidered welcome mat sitting in the front door and clicked his tongue twice and then nodded. He then closed the door. That's the same green and yellow materials in the closet. I'm assuming she made it? Sure, she was making stuff all the time, I hear. So what? Well, according to those books she had in the sewing room, I would venture a safe guess it's not your run-of-the-mill everyday welcome mat. What do you mean? Let's head out the back way we came and go back to my car. Mr. Simon blinked. Okay. Soon Henry was lugging a large traveling case out of the trunk and opening it on the hood of his car. Henry reached in and drew out a pair of purple latex gloves. He then pulled out a large burlap bag and unfolded it. Mr. Simon could see all sorts of odd devices inside the case, including what he thought were saws, knives, and other menacing-looking tools. He also couldn't comprehend how the traveling case, as large as it was, could hold so many things. The sledgehammer he'd seen alone must have been 4 feet long. What? Come on, let's get this over with. Okay. Henry marched up the steps muttering something sing-song-like under his breath, something Mr. Simon had never heard before, nor ever would again. What are you... Once again, Henry motioned to him to be silent and stood over the mat. He snapped on the purple latex gloves and motioned to Mr. Simon to step back. You may not want to see this. Why? Because sometimes the psychic residue sticks around afterwards, and it also stinks like crazy. Oh. Henry mentally gave himself a 3-count, made a lunge, and ripped off the mat. A small, writhing mass of maggots greeted them, and true to Henry's word, they now gave off an incredible stench. Oh, God! And at that, Mr. Simon retched on the lawn. Good, Henry stated, not nearly as bad as it could have been. This should all dissipate on its own about an hour or two. Those things can't exist exposed like this on this earthly plane for long. They'll just turn to dust, and that will be that. No more danger here, from what I can tell. Henry then deftly rolled up the mat, dropped it into the bag. He then carefully snapped off the purple latex gloves and dropped them inside as well. He tightly tied off the bag with a leather cord and dropped it at his feet. And that's it? Mr. Simon asked, wiping his mouth with his handkerchief, making a few noisy spits on the ground. Are you sure it's safe and all now? What the hell was that thing? And why was it there anyway? Well, spells and magic aren't exactly science, you know. Sometimes these people, enchanted objects, take the life of their own, especially when there's no one around to control and maintain them anymore. Mr. Simon stared at him, blinking and dumbfounded. Think of it as a home security system gone wrong. What? Henry shrugged as he started getting the carrying case in order. That's the simplest way I can explain it. But I could go into further details of the whys and wherefores, but hours would seem like days, and I really can't give you a crash course in the metaphysics involved. But call me if anything else happens, and I think you'll find the house easier to sell now. But to be on the safe side, I'd wait about a week or so for anything else that might wear off. But I'll mail you my bill. Please pay it as soon as you get it. My accountant would appreciate that. Good day, Mr. Simon. Henry carefully put the carrying case in the burlap sack into his trunk, got into his car, backed out of the driveway, and drove off.
I didn't think of any questions to ask because I was just planning the last thing. So here's what I was planning.
Well, I will let you know before you continue that we do have, this is Roy's work. We do have a bunch of other books by Roy sitting there on the table. And if you're interested in more of his works, and there are more Henry Carlson short stories too.
No.
And a novel. You can look up his Amazon author page.
Awesome. So, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Roy.